Minister Neale Richmond, please.
Corla, and I really do welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate, to speak in favour of this motion, and this gives us a great opportunity, Corla, not only just to speak to the detail of this pact, but to speak more widely about the issue of migration. I know a lot of people have been calling for that, and it's important. But I must say, Corla, I thought it was spectacular. I spent 4.5 years having to listen to Nigel Farage's contribution to Brexit debates, but little did I know that I'd hear it repeated for a good 3.5 minutes by Deputy Tobin. That was spectacular Eurosceptic nonsense. That was absolutely mind-bending. I respectfully, Deputy Tobin, it took you 90 seconds to use the canard of the EU army. I was just waiting for you to talk about straight bananas. That's how ridiculous you got at one stage. And the absolute twisting of truth, Corla, is lessening this debate. And the genuine desire, it took Deputy Tobin 7 minutes to actually mention the pact at hand. He was citing issues, talking about a hard border, talking about checks on a border, no checks on a border, talking about welcoming immigrants, and then talking about a firmer system. And this whole entire notion, which I'll come to in a minute, that somehow we can do this all on our own and we'd be better of our own. And taking the names of Connolly and Pearce into the context of this debate, I think lessens the debate, Deputy Tobin, and it just shows the sort of populism nonsense that you've been doing. You're very welcome back to the chamber. I appreciate you spent the last number of weeks campaigning. Well, all right, well, I'll address the issues. With some of the issues that you raised are ridiculous. This notion that we're talking about a European Defence Union, talking about a EU army, has no place in this debate. And it's that sort of level debate, Deputy Tobin, that leads us, unfortunately, having to spend the whole time myth-busting. But the issue I would like to address is the pact at hand. And I'll get more pertinently to the issue of sovereignty, and Deputy McGrath, you're due to speak in 2 slots' time, and I'll listen to your contribution then. I look forward to it as ever. In relation to the pact, very few people have talked about the detail of the pact, the fact that this took 8 years to come about. This took 8 years of contribution by Irish people in Brussels at every level to ensure that we talk about this. When I was on the EU's Committee of the Regions, I sat on the Civics Committee when all my colleagues from the Mediterranean were wanting to talk about Mediterranean crossings, about migration, about the asylum crisis, and the fact that this was seen in a total vacuum as some sort of humanitarian issue alone in Ireland. But the issue has been moving on further and further, and what is quite clear is that the Dublin III regulations are completely out of date and no longer fit for purpose. And what this pact seeks to do and can do, and why we are absolutely right to do, is make sure that the system across the European Union is better harmonised, is quicker, and it's more cost effective. That is fair to those who are seeking refuge, to those who are migrating, but also crucially, it provides a pathway for EU member states to address the challenges that are being very clearly presented in every community and every village across this country, and as it has been doing for other EU member states for quite some time. One of the root causes of the issues that so many people face is the scourge of human trafficking and smuggling. And I remember the report launched by former Minister Simon Coveney when he was a member of the European Parliament back in 2004, citing the issue of human trafficking and how this was absolutely plaguing not just those who are being trafficked, but communities across the European Union. This is where the roots of the need for reform and the absolute need for this pact lies. And I think it's really, really important, therefore, when we're talking about the pact, that I use this opportunity to respond to some of the claims that will be made in this chamber, no doubt, or have been consistently made, or indeed that all of us are receiving consistently into our office by email, or we're seeing it on social media, and often it's being presented as absolute fact. And I think and I'll talk about the area of sovereignty in a second, in our entire role within the European Union, but a common tactic is to say that this is going to lead to 30,000 individuals, asylum seekers, migrants, whatever you want to call it, being forced upon the Irish government. And I just think this is something that is a very deliberate tactic used by those who are looking to spread disinformation. That's absolute nonsense, because, Corla, anyone who has read the pact further than the first page will know that if the solidarity clause is invoked in Ireland, Ireland will only have to accept a fraction of this, exactly 648 people, or pay a far smaller financial contribution to the Solidarity Fund if we choose. We're not forced to, if we choose. Another area is that we will have that not only will this allow us to have a quicker turnaround time, but we'll also have a far better way of returning those who have failed in the asylum process to member states. Because and I take a great issue to, is I think it was the line that Deputy O'Rourke used, in that somehow we are far better to do this independently, ourselves alone, that old trope, that somehow it's better to look at this, which is a global phenomenon. And when we're talking about migration, we have to talk far more than just about accommodation. We also have to talk about the motivating trends, and that can be war, that can be climate change, that can be the pursuit of a better life, that can be persecution and so on else. But the very notion that you can do it on your own is an absolute fallacy, Ken Curla. And we only literally have to look across the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, who left the EU for many reasons, but one of which was used most egregiously by the hard Brexiteers, was somehow that this was going to address immigration. And we see the election platform launched by the Reform Party yesterday, where they absolutely rule out any further immigration. And we're not talking about illegal immigration, we're not talking about asylum seeker, absolute non-essential immigration into the United Kingdom going forward. One of the issues that they cited is somehow that Brexit will help the UK process asylum seekers much quicker, which we've obviously seen to be false. Because what we've seen is post-Brexit, the level of migration going into the UK has gone up in terms of legal migration, in terms of illegal migration, in terms of asylum seekers, in terms of cross-channel crossings, and the ability to utilise the provisions under EU law in terms of returning people who failed asylum applications, in terms of reunification, is completely lost on the British government. So this notion that has been put across repeatedly that somehow that we should do this on our own, that we are an island, we can solve this, is absolute nonsense and is a recipe to cause trouble and indeed to make sure that our systems absolutely fall apart. And the other area that was cited at length and will be cited at length, that somehow this is a surrender of sovereignty, and I received that in a number of comments today. And it's an old issue, it's an issue as old as time, it's an issue that goes back to Deputy Tobin's comments when he said, well, let's get back to what the European project was originally about, some sort of free trading area. But anyone with a scant knowledge of European or Irish history knows that that's not what it started as. It started with the European Coal and Steel Commission, and it started with the pursuit of peace and the pursuit of bringing people together and giving better lives to the largest displacement of people on this continent in history. That's where the European project started. The European Economic Community came much later. It came after Euratom, it came after the development of the Common Agricultural Policy, it came after much more. And Europe and the notion of a European project has always been about far more than a collection of member states. It's been far more about a loose trading agreement. It's not some sort of NAFTA for the continent. It's far more than that. It's far more important than that. And it is absolutely about pooling sovereignty. It is about sharing ideas. It's not about taking edicts from some foreign power. We look at the two previous Secretary Generals of the European Commission, Ken Curla, both from Dublin, both from Ireland. They're Irish people, and we have seen throughout our over 40-year history of the European project, Irish men and women serving at every single level of the European Union, serving with distinction. And when Irish ministers go into European Council meetings, they represent Irish people, but they look to get a common solution, to get a common good developed across the continent. So this notion that somehow by opting in, making that decision into a pact is someone giving up sovereignty, is something that we need to nip in the bud. Because we're making a decision that will allow us to do things better, it will allow us to do things quicker, it will allow us to do things fairer, and indeed it will ensure that it is absolutely Irish people that have a say. We're not going to cede decision making going forward. Ireland will still retain the veto power. You know, this was already just said a minute ago that somehow, no, absolutely, the rules are going to change, we're going to be forced into an EU army, we're going to use QMV. These notions and discussions have been allowed to seep into debate without people calling them out, saying that they're absolutely false. That's really important. We heard about the nature restoration law, how somehow that this was forced upon before the European Parliament came back into sitting. You know, anyone who says that doesn't realise that the nature restoration law has moved past the European Parliament. It's a matter for the European Council. It's the ordinary legislative procedure. But yet people want to ignore the rules, want to ignore legislation, want to ignore constitution to score cheap political points and clearly spread fear about very important issues. I understand that some people have concerns with the EU Migration Pact. Some people will say it's too hard or it's not hard enough. But what it is a compromise by 27 sovereign states Member states of a collective union who've made a decision to work together for the better good for their citizens, the better good for those seeking asylum, the better good for promoting the EU as the best place in the world, the largest economy, and a place that people understandably want to come to. But this, unfortunately, has just given rise to an easy bit of EU bashing with absolute ignorance and scant regard for what is a very important pact. As I said, it's the product of 8 years of detailed negotiation between ministers, officials, members of the European Parliament, and much else. I think it's absolutely crucially important that Ireland opts into it at this time, but we opt into it giving clear information to people. And as I said, this is an opportune time for a lot of people to discuss migration more widely, and we've heard contributions from deputies already, and some of them are raised many times before, who want to talk about events in terms of accommodation in their own local community, and they're entitled to that, and they're entitled to seek answers, but they're also responsible to make sure we see that we're discussing first and foremost about this pact. And if this leads to a wider debate on migration, I think we have to put things absolutely clear on the record. And I have no hesitation in saying, Cairn that immigration is a good thing. Immigration is a good thing for our country. It's a good thing for our economy. It's a good thing for our society. When I had the privilege to serve as a Minister of State in the Department of Enterprise, I was proud to issue 31,000 work permits to people from outside the European Union who are coming here to work in our hospitals, to work on our building sites, to work in our multinational companies, in our communities, to contribute so much. That is why it is so vitally important that we have an immigration and a migration system that works. That is why it is so important that we opt into this migration pact, to make sure that those who come here to seek work go through the appropriate channel looking for work permits. And Deputy Damien English, when he was Minister, managed to get that waiting time reduced from 3 months to 12 days, an exceptional piece of work with dedicated officials. We see the work ongoing by Minister McEntee's officials and other officials to make sure that the visa system is sped up. A lot of people have said, well, this is what the government can do now. They can allocate more resources. The resources are being allocated. Just today we hear Minister McEntee's announcement in relation to more officials being able to work in the visa processing system, more officials going into the asylum processing system to make sure it works, because we do need to reform our system. We, of course, need to speed it up. And I just wanted to finish my contribution on a brief comment, Cairn, in relation to an event in my constituency yesterday. And my constituency for a number of weeks has been a focus of a lot of commentary in relation to IPAS centres, in relation to community engagement, and that's completely understatement. Unfortunately, there were a couple of unsavoury incidents that required arrests and required the presence of An Garda Síochána and a number of people from outside the constituency being arrested. But what I witnessed yesterday in the Pastoral Centre of Holy Cross Church in Dundrum was something perhaps we don't see enough on the news. They expected a crowd of maybe 10, 12, but we saw over 120 people, asylum seekers, people born and reared in Dundrum, people who come to Ireland in the last couple of years, coming together to network, to meet, to arrange. We saw representatives from 2 different football clubs and 2 different cricket clubs who wanted to work, to integrate, to welcome people. Because inherently, I believe that is what is at the centre of the soul of Irish people. We are a welcoming people. We are the land of 100,000 welcomes. We need a system that makes sure that those welcomes are reflective of what's needed in society. And I fundamentally believe that the more we do it in cooperation with our European partners, the more we will get a system that works better. Because the people who were in that pastoral centre yesterday, Cairn, from all countries and beyond, and from local areas, people who've been in Ireland their entire lives, born and bred here, people who've only arrived a number of years ago but are as Irish as you and I and hold our passport proudly, and we see athletes representing our country proudly whose perhaps weren't born here, whose parents weren't born here. It doesn't make them any less Irish than you and I, Cairn, and we have to remember that. But they want to know that the system works. They want to know that we'll debate fairly about how we improve that system, that we'll make sure that system is truly representative of what we want to achieve. And in order to get a system that works, I fundamentally believe that we need to pass this motion as speedily as possible.
Thank you very much, Ms.